Editor's note, I had to cut out a lot of Hake's derailing takes, so stick around till the end to see a lightning round of them.
I also want to shout out RGR. Thank you for coming back. You've been a missed voice in this space, so I appreciate you coming back onto the scene. Thank you kindly.
Oh my god, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Wow, look at that. Friendship. We'll see how long that lasts. Now we're going to throw it over to Riley.
Hi everyone, my name is Riley Grace Rochong. I am a dual JD Masters in Public Policy student. I've done a lot of content talking about policy, especially as it intersects with some progressive issues. I've taken a bit of a break recently to focus on schooling and to figure out what exactly I want to do with my platform. But I want to start getting back into streaming because I'm really passionate about these issues and I like talking to people. So thanks for having me.
Would also like to throw out there that she has a wonderful article in Maryland Matters about trans panic defense, and I recommend you all go read it. It'll apply to your state as well, promise you. So we're going to now go into the first topic of the day, which is going to be the Rittenhouse trial. Obviously, I know this is a divisive issue, so I'm just going to ask everybody to heed some caution when trying to engage with others on this, because I will mute people if you do not quiet down when I start talking, and I will use it liberally. We're being law and order today, okay? So we're going to start this time in the bottom right-hand corner with the person who was just talking, Vouch Vidya.
Yeah, first of all, more like Shittenhouse. Happy to get that one out there. I think that, so the trial right now is going over a number of charges. What we're mostly looking at here is the self-defense claim, which I'm not a legal expert. It seems like the self-defense claim that he has towards the homicide charges is legit. The circumstances of the killings are such that he would be, that he'll get let off on that. There are some other charges he might catch, but that's what people are really paying attention to. But I think that the conversation here on whether or not what he did legally falls under the definition of self-defense isn't really the pointed issue to me. It's more about the cultural forces that would lead somebody like him to not only feel it's necessary to, but actually go out and essentially act as a right-wing militia during a civil rights protest under the, the guise or perceived intent of defending property. It's a symptom of a disease, a broader cultural issue that extends well past the legal definition of self-defense.
Okay, next we're going to throw it over to Riley.
So are we talking about just anything having to do with the Kyle Rittenhouse trial, or is there anything specific you want to focus on?
You can interpret the question however you want.
Okay, so I guess going a little bit off of what Vosh was talking about, I would disagree that this doesn't have to do with the legal issues, something that's been very troubling to me just watching, because there are criticisms that you could raise about some of the decisions that the trial judge has made. For example, there was a ruling that they could not refer to the people who Kyle had killed as victims, but that if the prosecution laid, or if the defense laid the proper evidence, that they could refer to them as rioters or looters. It's weird to specify that they could do the alternative. It's not necessarily unheard of to rule in that kind of way. It usually has to do with a 403 evidentiary ruling, but it's weird to specify that they're able to do the alternative. And then other things for example, having the court clap or applaud for the expert in the case. Now, granted, it was on Veterans Day, and they were the only veteran in the room, so you could argue, well, it's plausible, they could do it, but it's still, a little weird. That being said, just from what I have seen at the trial and going over it, it seems like a lot of the evidentiary rulings have been reasonable. I haven't seen, any major red flags flaring up. I'd be interested in hearing what LectureFan has to say on that front, since he also has legal background, but I was talking to Pisco yesterday, and that would seem to be, the consensus among us looking at the case so far. But there's a lot of people online who are talking about this as if the case is rigged, and that's troubling, because I want to make sure that we don't end up in a situation where just because the case may not go over how we want it to personally, that we start saying that we should not trust the results of the of this. I was going to say of the election. It's very similar in that respect, but trusting the results or the outcome of this case. Appeals will happen, and we should trust that process, but we need to make sure that we still trust the process. I also agree that this does not mean that we can't morally talk about what he did, but I just want to make sure that we're all separating those conversations. I'll leave that there.
Okay, Riley was the first, so I'll throw it to Riley.
I just want to like ask to get this out of the way. Does anyone actually like have any issues with the legal matters in this case, or are we all just talking about like the moral issues or the other circumstantial issues? I just kind of want to
Great
like.
point.
Sorry, what?
I said that's a great point.
Okay, so I'd probably just distract. We could do it like one-on-one, but my problem is like there's just some information that the prosecution is using in order to try to make their case that I feel like goes contradictory to the evidence. And basically the crux of the debate is like whether or not defense attorneys or whether or not prosecutors should have the right to basically ignore exculpatory evidence that should, be able to basically exonerate somebody or basically exonerate somebody. Do they have the right to basically just throw shit at the wall and see what sticks? And I think that's one of the main things that like libertarians or conservatives have been frustrated about with this case is basically seeing the prosecution just kind of throw shit at the wall.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay,
I
so
agree.
does anyone? All right, hold on. So does anyone else actually have any knowledge about that? I'd be fine to talk about that, but like if everyone, I heard everyone talk on this, and it sounds like everyone is talking about more about like the ethics of what Kyle did.
Well, I would go into an anecdote specifically within the case where there is a moment where the judge and the prosecution are having a back and forth in which the prosecution has mentioned things that multiple times have been cut and clear. Do not bring this up. You will plant a bad seed. It could corrupt the juror's decision making. And it was about his silence. There were other moments as well where there were basically arguing what color the sky is, pixelation, and trying to explain interpolation to a judge who just knows pinch and zoom, doesn't understand the fact that whenever you have a canvas that is 1920 by 1080 pixels, whenever you are pinching and zooming, you're essentially cutting away pixels to add in pixels in hopes of clarifying an image. Now, whenever the judge asked the prosecution that the burden of proof was on them to prove that there had to be a precise, rebuttal from their, I believe it was an FBI person who had clarified the image, he could not give that clarity. They knowingly put him up there just so that they could keep talking about the subject. These are episodes of what I consider state malfeasance, and the fact that they'd much rather drum up a bad feeling or a theory for which will get thrown out anyway, but once it's in their brain, it's in their brain. These are all episodes of what I consider a state that is grasping at straws. They want a result. They don't want the correct result. And that's basically mine,
So I have a lot to say on that. Wait, hold on. I have a lot to say on that because, so I'm going to begin by saying I don't like the way that the prosecution has been conducting a lot of their case, but also I don't think that the way that they're acting is atypical for how a lot of other prosecutors would act in similar circumstances. This is a situation where the prosecution has bad facts and bad case law. Now, I think that there's a really good criticism of the prosecutor with the Fifth Amendment issue when he commented on his silence. That is inexcusable. The other issue when they were talking about propensity evidence, right? So the comment that Rittenhouse made about like, oh yeah, I wish I would have my rifle so I could be able to shoot at other people. The circumstances where where the prosecutor tried to reintroduce that comment makes it seem like he actually tried to do what the judge wanted them to do, which is usually in those circumstances, or if it's more prejudicial and probative, you have to be able to establish more evidence to be able to demonstrate that it is in fact relevant or more probative than it is prejudicial, or substantially more probative than it is prejudicial, because all relevant evidence is going to be prejudicial to some effect. But in that case, it seems like the prosecutor probably tried to do the best that they could, but they just are dealt bad facts. I wouldn't say that this is an example of prosecutors trying to like act maliciously or whatever. It's just that they're doing the best that they can with bad evidence. You can say that they're not doing a good job, but to make them out to be evil, I think is misleading.
Can I respond to that? Because I think this is kind of my frustration with it. So, like, should prosecutors be able to throw shit at the wall, even if they kind of know it's bad? Should they be able to prejudice a jury as long as they think that they can get away with it without getting slammed too hard? And on top of that, this is kind of my question. I didn't get a direct answer yesterday. You were saying that it's like, oh, it's inexcusable for him to do that. Is this something that, like, I don't know, like fucking first-year law students fucking know? Like, do you think that it was intentional, or was it just a mistake by somebody who has a shitty job. Like that was kind of my frustration.
The Fifth Amendment issue is definitely, so that's something that you're normally going to be taught in like evidence. It's not going to be first year, but it's going to be like second or third year. Usually, so like that is a pretty egregious issue, and I think that that is warranted of criticism. But with the other issue, with like the propensity, like the comment about the rifle, right? That seems like an example more. It's where it's like they tried to make it relevant. They tried to do what the judge asked, and the judge didn't buy what they said. I don't hold that as much against the prosecutor because they essentially were trying. You can make an argument that they were trying to give the judge what they wanted. They just didn't do a good enough job. But I wouldn't fault the attorney for trying to do that if that's arguably going to be one of the best pieces of evidence they could get into the case, to be able to prove their kind of theory that Kyle is like this, they're trying to like make it into like, oh, Kyle was this evil, scheming person beforehand. That would be a really good comment to be able to get in to support their theory.
I have a question really quickly for the eggheads on this panel, the legal nerds. What do we say about the claims that the judge has been a little bit sussy? How do you feel about those claims?
The judge so like I said it earlier, I feel like the judge has been a little bit sussy. Usually whenever you ask for things like a mistrial or you have issues where you think that the judge is being impartial, usually the question is like, every judge is probably going to be biased, at least to some degree, right? Like this is just kind of like a matter of the fact for dealing with the legal system. We're all humans. We try to make the system to account for human error. So what will happen is that there will be like appeals after the case is decided, and there's going to be like some arguments that based on some things like the judge having everyone clap for the expert, for example. Like it's a little sussy. But I don't think it rises to the level of being able to throw out like all of his rulings, because a lot of them have seemed at least reasonable.
Do you think that, because I did see that whole like, do we have any veterans in the room? Oh, hey, it's the defense's next witness, can we all give her a... I did see that. That did seem really weird. I don't know if that would be enough to declare a mistrial, but do you think so you don't think that anything's rigged? I don't either, but do you think that there's a good pretense, a good excuse to, at the very least, say that behavior ought to be changed? Is there... What can we do about this alleged sussiness?
I don't know. It's hard because like usually like in a lot of cases where if you have judges who are like this, as an attorney, it's probably in your best interest to just try and like go with what the judge wants to the best of your ability, because ultimately like the judge has a lot of power in these kind of circumstances, right? And it's not like you can make the judge like change their mind, and you can't really like give a judge an order to not be as biased, because like if you try, I don't even know what you would try to do that, but if you
you could try. I don't know if it'd work, but you could try.
But it would make the judge probably like royally pissed off at you, and you never want to piss off the judge. So you can fault like the prosecution for royally pissing off the judge, because that's the last thing that you want to do.
Can we
One
just
second.
admit that
One second, Connor. 1 second. I want to throw it over to Hake. You tried to speak earlier, and I saw it was stopped. I want to make sure he gets a chance to speak. Hake?
Thank you. What can we do about the fact that, I think Lecture Fan said it first, these people, Kyle should never have even been charged with at least most of this stuff, especially the most serious of the crimes, in the first place. But the only reason he was charged, seemingly, in my impression, was because of the lynch mob in the media and on Twitter and elsewhere, and the local government that failed to protect their city. It seems like it reminds me of George Zimmerman. Aren't you supposed to only make a charge against a person if you think that you can win without a reasonable doubt? But they're like ridiculously overcharging these people when the facts are quite clear.
No, I think it's entirely reasonable.
You can charge. It's not when beyond a reasonable doubt. That's the standard for the ruling.
No,
of the
it's
case.
purely up to
I don't
the
know how it
DA.
works, and I don't know how
it's
like
up to the DA.
All right.
I mean, I don't know like I don't know how you guys do it over there.
You
but,
go to
like,
500 different counties. It's going to give you 500 different results on how they would pursue these charges.
I don't
Wait.
think it's at all atypical for Rittenhouse to receive the charges that he has. Like part of the legal process is determining innocence as well. If anything, we would be happy that Rittenhouse, even people on the left, the right, everyone, we should be happy that Rittenhouse is getting these charges and a trial following, because the alternative would be essentially lawlessness. You can't claim to be law and order while also throwing out the mechanism by which we determine whether or not a person has actually violated the law, right? If he ends up getting exonerated of these of these charges, then that's something you should be celebrating. You shouldn't be angry that he was tested to begin with.
I'd agree.
No,
Wait, one second. Riley wanted to say something. I'm gonna write lecture fan down. Riley Loner, and I'll write lecture fan down.
Yeah, I just want to say that, like, very quickly. All right, so I'm going to make some background appeal because I used to work in the Attorney General Office of Maryland for their organized crime division, so I have experience with like some degree of like charging. In this kind of case, what we're dealing with, so like it's important to recognize that self-defense is a justification defense. Usually when it's brought up by defense attorneys, it's brought up when you already acknowledge or where you're already basically agreeing that a lot of the material elements of the charges that are being made are already basically met, right? It would be really, really weird to not at least bring the charges against Rittenhouse when it's very clear that, like, I don't know, so like if there's like manslaughter, right? So common law manslaughter is like unlawful killing of another, and then mens rea is going to vary, right? We already basically know that those elements are absolutely met, right? So it would be really weird to not put that in front of a trial when we already know that there is a dead body. Isn't it multiple? There's dead body. Kyle did it, and now the matter is just like, did he do it with the requisite mens rea? And also, did he have a justification for doing it? So it would be really, really weird to not at least bring this to trial. That's
Even though no sane person would convict him.
Do I think?
Yeah,
what?
I mean, I don't know like how you guys do it over there, right? But like over here, if there's a self-defense case, even if it's like fairly clear cut, like if someone dies, it should probably go to trial, like just to, you know, like so the criminal justice system can like confirm that on paper, especially since you're going off camera footage. Like I think it's fairly normal.
How do you know if a person's going to be convicted?
Wait, there was a question to Riley. I just want to make sure she can respond to that.
Yeah, what was the question?
Hake?
Oh, I said even though no sane person would convict this young man.
I wouldn't say that. I think that a reasonable person could come to the conclusion that he. So one of the elements of self-defense, we didn't go over all of them. We can go over all of them if you want to, but one of the elements in common law self-defense is that you. It's also required that you did not create the circumstances where you needed to use deadly force in order to be able to defend yourself. So there's a reasonable argument that could be made that he ended up contributing to creating the circumstances that led to him having to use the deadly force. Now, I'm not saying that like any reasonable person is going to come to that conclusion, but I think that a reasonable jury could.
Also, the point of a trial is to find out the evidence of the case, right? You can't really say whether a person would be convicted before the trial has happened, because that's when the arguments are made for whether or not they should be convicted.
Yeah.
Okay, no, Vosh and Lonerbox are wrong. Brandt is correct. When Brandt said you could get 500 different counties and 500 different decisions, that's absolutely correct. It's called prosecutorial discretion. It's a very, very important thing in criminal prosecutions. It's the prosecutor's discretion. That's why prosecutors are elected. In Montana and a lot of other states, county attorneys, they're elected officials. The attorney general is elected. At the federal level, the United States attorneys are appointed by the president. These are political positions because they have a ton of discretion, and so it's called prosecutorial discretion for an absolute reason.
What do you think?
I find it very rich to hear leftists. I find it very rich to hear leftists who are the first to always criticize our criminal justice system as being sort of rigged against the criminal defendant. And you always hear leftists talking about how the prosecutors and the judge, they're always going to lunch together, they work together all the time, and the whole system is rigged against the criminal defendant. And they're forced into plea deals all the time because it's so expensive and so risky to go to trial and blah, 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 blah. But when it fits our political narrative, now we're going to say, a criminal trial is to find out if they should even be prosecuted. No, it's not. You shouldn't be charging people. That a prosecutor shouldn't be exercising his prosecutorial discretion to pursuing charges like this and literally potentially ruining somebody's life just by going through the trial, when that discretion clearly should have been exercised to not charge him at all.
Yeah, all right. I have to talk about a couple things that have to do with the law. So first off, like this idea of discretion, I don't know why people are focusing on this. All that discretion has to do is it determines whether or not a prosecutor can choose to bring a case or not. I feel like it's a slam dunk. I feel like any reasonable prosecutor would bring this case for a reason that we've talked about before. I can't see any possible realistic scenario where a prosecutor who's given this case cannot choose to bring it. As far as like the 500 DAs or 500 different judges, I feel like this is saying that there's a lot of variability in how people decide cases. And while we can make arguments that there's some variability, I feel like this is being vastly over-exaggerated. I feel like people of different political backgrounds are going to come to, generally speaking, comparable judicial decisions a lot of the time. We saw this, for example, last year with with a case about gender and sexuality discrimination that was chiefly led by a Trump appointee judge. And in this case, we have a judge who is like, as we've discussed, sometimes it seems like he is more biased towards conservatives, but he was appointed by a Democrat, right? It's very hard to be able to say that like, oh, we're going to have a ton of variability when generally speaking, like even though there's going to be like some bias that comes in, a lot of the time people who you put in these kind of situations have been practicing the law throughout their entire life and are going to be like generally pretty decent about their application. And even if you make arguments that they make mistakes sometime, we do have an appeals process to be able to remedy this. But even that being said, if there is an appeal, I don't see this having precedential value, especially like what you're saying. In order for it to have that kind of precedential value, to have to go to the circuit court and then maybe the Supreme Court. But the facts on this case just don't seem that controversial. Like the facts seem like pretty indisputable for the most part. So I don't see it having that kind of precedential effect. That's all.
Like you're open carrying your open.
No,
carrying
no,
your
it's
gun,
just
right?
no. I just think your language is incredibly loaded. This like 3 men just started chasing. Like, no, that's not really what happened, is it? There were a series of escalating incidents and distrust on both sides. Rittenhouse killed a person after they chased him down. Then afterwards, he was going over to report himself to the police, after which people followed him, and there was an additional altercation. The language you're using is incredibly misleading for the purpose of being moralistic. Kyle Rittenhouse is young. I'm not expecting that his ability to.
I didn't get into their motives,
situation.
did I? I didn't get into their motives or anything. All that I said was
you're talking about the morality of their behavior.
No, I said the objective facts of the case are that 3 men chased a minor. I didn't say an offender, a family offender, and a repeat offender.
Those aren't the totality of the facts. You're just selecting for those ones specifically because you're using very cultivated language, which is
You're the one that's trying to reduce speculation. I'm in no way trying to speculate in all the how or the why. I'm telling you what happened.
Did anything happen before the events that you describe?
Yes, multiple recordings from multiple different angles, multiple different witnesses, explaining not only Rosenbaum's threats to the group and Rittenhouse himself, not to mention the weapons that were within the crowd, including the ones that were on hand for a chain and a bag full of homemade chemical devices, not to mention an explicit confrontation.
In so much euphemism that I genuinely don't understand which series of events you're referring to here. The reason why people aren't talking about it.
Obviously haven't watched the case where they have demonstrated I mean, it's almost getting to the point where they were just being redundant because they were just driving the point home like this guy self-defended himself.
I was just confused because it seems like, all right, you might not be saying like, oh, this is what their mindset is, but when you present facts like, oh, they had a bomb, oh, they were at places X, Y, and Z, like it certainly seems like, even in like a legalistic sense, that you are certainly insinuating what their mindset is. So I feel like it's not like to say that like, oh, I'm just presenting all these facts and saying like, oh, well, you know, I'm not saying that they had this kind of mindset. Like it seems like you're certainly at least insinuating it.
I'm going by what their actions, not what I like think they were thinking or the level of malintent that they had. I'm going like
talk to us as humans. We're not idiots, all right? We know what this is supposed to paint the picture of.
Okay, can we move on to the morality of Rittenhouse? Anybody want to take the staff on that? Because we have about 30 minutes left on this topic.
Like, I have no idea how you can't even put yourself in the shoes of a motherfucker that basically sees bad shit going on in his community and feels like he needs to do something in order to step up and stop it. Lumi, you seem fucking animated. I would love to hear your opinion.
It's not his community. You keep saying this is his community.
Dylan, you've been waiting for this shit all fucking night. Lumi, can you please expand on why it's not his community?
My understanding is he came in from an entirely different place, which is something that Antifa gets targeted
do you
for
know
all
where?
the
Okay,
time.
hold on, no, fuck this. We've been waiting for this all night. Do you know where Antioch, Illinois is?
1 hour from the border of.
No, it's 15 minutes. Do you know where Kenosha is? 15 minutes away. Do you know where Kyle Rittenhouse worked?
Did he work there?
He worked in Kenosha, Wisconsin. He drove there every fucking day.
Okay, that's fair. I'll concede that.
Also,
wait,
stop. There except for
Brant.
Sorry.
There we go. Law and order, okay? I'll let you be a Democrat for a second and see what happens. Okay. Lumi, I'm sorry, I didn't even get to hear what you said. What were you saying?
No, I just conceded my point.
Okay, I'm gonna throw it over to RGR now.
Yeah, I'm glad I got to weigh in more on the legal discussion, just because I've been seeing a lot of people think that they are legal experts on Twitter when they are not. But I was actually reasonably happy with the way that the legal discussion went over. I would have weighed in more on the moral part, but it was already pretty spicy. So yeah.
Now, the next topic is going to be, should people be woke, basically? Is it good to be woke? Now, this is a vague word, woke. Everybody has a different definition, so I would just give you a tip that it probably helps if you define what this word means to you, or if you have some dictionary definition you wanted to run off of. But I don't want, if this gets too much into a linguistics debate, I will try to steer it away from that a certain amount into this conversation. Next is going to be Riley.
Yeah, I think it'll depend on how you define it, like what Lumi was saying. If you think that being woke is like, I don't know, like you think that all white people are inherently racist, or you think if you misgender someone accidentally, then the gender Gestapo will come for you in the middle of the night, then yeah, being woke will be bad to you. If you think that being woke means that, like, you think that the civil rights movement was good and that, yeah, like, giving LGBT people rights is something we ought advocate for, then I would say that is a good thing. I would also say that, like, most people would just qualify as woke at that point. It probably drops out as, like, a useful signifier. I'm not, like, super partial either way, so it kind of depends on what the panel agrees on.
Okay, by the way, when you type, please do mute your microphone, okay, Loner Box. Vosh.
Do you totally, Brant for Liberty, do you entirely reject the framing of woke as potentially being aware of systematic racism, or do you deny that it exists? Like, that's something I'm curious on.
Can you point at a law that's in the books right now
that's not systemic racism?
No, I mean, what's your definition then? Let's set our goalposts in the ground.
Shouldn't you explain your definition when you said you don't like it? That's what we said at the beginning. Like, hey, conservatives are always super vague when they denounce wokeism. I'm trying to
clarify to find middle ground in this argument so that I can even accurately rebuttal. Maybe my term and their term is off. We're trying to define clarity right now.
Can we define what? I'm still unclear on exactly what the conservatives on the panel mean woke is. Like, actually, hold on.
Well, first off, I'm not a conservative fully. I am a libertarian. I share values with conservatives economically, but I differ from them socially.
Of course you do, buddy. Now, quick question. Can we get a raise of hands for people who think that there's any meaningful difference? Raise your hand if you do not think that there is a difference between being woke and being progressive. Raise your hands if you see no difference between those categories.
Well, I think it just depends on whose framing you're taking, because it's so obvious the conservatives are taking like a really different framing.
Right, because what's apparent is that Hake and Lecture Fan, they aren't arguing against being, they're just arguing against being progressive. That's what's going on here. They just don't see any difference. They just argue against being progressive.
Yeah, this is what, it used to be that, like, liberals, like, everybody would call people liberals as an insult, and that was in the 90s and early 2000s. You would call somebody a liberal, and then liberals were like, no, we don't want to call people liberals, and then they wanted to be called progressives. Now. It's just like they don't want to talk about global warming anymore. Now they want to talk about climate change. The left just changes these words because the vast majority of the American people learn, like, okay, global warming, it's a little bit, we're not all going to die from global warming. And so then it becomes progressive, and now it's woke, and now you guys want to run away from woke, even though you guys know exactly what it is, and you guys are all woke, and it's absolutely about shutting down free speech and shutting down anybody that disagrees with you. It's American Marxism. Mark Levin wrote an entire book about this. It's a strain of Marxism, and Lumi, I'm not saying that you can't talk about it. I'm not saying you can't talk about these issues. I'm just saying if you're spending all of your time talking about those issues, it shows you're pretty unsophisticated. You probably haven't traveled the world much, and you're not using your resources and your time wisely.
Wait, how?
What issues do you care about?
And here's the thing: if you would watch my stream, you would know that I criticize the Chinese Communist Party and the global left, the global Marxist left, all the time.
Wait, hold on. Do you think everyone here is part of the global Marxist?
Not world leader in Marxism.
Yeah, we're not the global Marxist left. I can guarantee you, I'm not a Marxist, and we're not talking about Marxism.
We're getting there.
And I don't know. Did you see Twitter a few months back?
Have you heard about critical race theory? Any day now.
No, but I mean, we're not like, this isn't a conversation about we're talking about fucking, like, probably like largely social issues in the context of talking about like
Well,
woke.
that would bleed into being woke. I think I would
Marxism?
actually concede to the left that conservatives do view, because I do have a lot of conversations with conservatives literally every day, and we watch a lot of pertinent content that is adjacent to what we're talking about right now. A lot of it stems from school boards, parents going to school boards actually distributing anecdotes and evidence that substantiate that woke culture is being adopted, I guess is the best word I can say,
Wait,
adopted
what's
into
woke culture, though?
mandatory. Now, I think
But
everyone in here that's for
culture? Like
say
what?
again?
Like
What
what's
woke
the
culture?
thing?
What thing? What
Like
ideas?
gay
religious-
marriage?
CRT. Examples. I'll give you
CRT.
an exact example.
Yep.
CRT.
What
there-
is-
there's
What is
specific-
CRT?
I've covered
Yep.
hundreds of hours of this. This isn't just even a single event. This isn't a
What
single
is
state.
CRT? Like what CRT? Like what idea?
Critical
right?
race theory.
But what is that?
Okay, but
And
That's just what it's called. What is it?
subjects adjacent
Oh, remember, it
to
doesn't exist. Oh, now CRT
Wait.
doesn't exist anymore,
No,
guys.
no,
Oh my
No,
God.
we're not saying critical race theory doesn't exist.
Wait, stop. Okay, there's too many people talking at once. Okay, so Vosh was the one doing the line of questioning, so I'll allow him to continue with the line of questioning. Then we have Connor and Hake. Continue.
Because you subbed one like vague talking point out for another. Like, okay, well we have woke things. Okay, well the woke things are CRT, but CRT is also one of those vague terms that conservatives use to mean everything and anything. So like, what of the CRT are we talking about? What ideas are being propagated?
The idea that a person of a specific narrative should feel as though they are an oppressor, and that the other should feel as though they are a victim. And through very
So-
many examples that are adopted into a curriculum, some of them may be as simple as a singular assignment. There might even be a course that has multiple chapters. I've had freelance
idea of white
essays where
supremacy?
somebody had no, the idea why somebody should feel guilty for why they are, let's say, a white person.
Feel
Those
guilty?
are specific. Yes, there are specific assignments people have, English teachers have given in this. I believe that one that I'm referencing is in Tennessee. You can look it up yourself. But a child was given an essay along with everyone else, and the one child spoke up about it. Also, there are multiple times where in Zoom classes, you have teachers experiencing or displaying bias to the point where they will badger children in the class that have separating ideas. I don't think this level of politics, and this is coming from libertarian, conservative, South right center. I don't know where that is in adjacent to you, but I think that distributes a political bias that could set up the next generation, keeping people in a framework of mind that could cause rebellion and not acceptance to. And in the long run, that could give us more problems than it could solutions. Now, I would, let me finish. I would concede, along with all the other individualists in here, that if there were electives in schools that are purely elective, not within the framework of the day, that we're paying for, if there were electives that are provided where people could be involved in an after-school program or something where if they wanted to participate in it, they could, having no bearance on their grade, I'm pretty sure a majority of I'm not going to speak for everyone, I'm not an absolutist here, but I'm going to say that there are a lot of people, if they're true individualists, they wouldn't care if it was voted through by their school board and it was something that was left on an elective rather than something that's tied to, let's say, your English class or a history class.
I just want to say, because you've only said one thing there that I take issue with, and it's the idea that children should feel guilty for their race. I don't think that happens that often. I think there are probably some instances that have been highly publicized, but why
Well, let me
couldn't
ask you this: do you condemn that? Do you condemn that?
Yes, I condemn that.
We all condemn that. Hands up if you condemn
Just on the
guilty
panel.
white people being considered
I got to
guilty for
agree.
being white.
Yeah, but
And-
why
Just on
can't
this
children-
panel.
Yeah, why would you
can't-
ban a whole ass thing just for that niche thing?
I was just gonna say real quick, when that was fantastic when Vosh asked Brandt for some specific examples and he gave two of them. It was like a mic drop moment.
Can I follow up on that? Because I actually looked up the
Sure.
example from Tennessee, and it seems like the only curriculum that was contested were just books about general American history as it respects to slavery. It's not anything that's specifically about like making kids feel guilty. That's what the mom said in her complaint letter. But the books are just books about the history of slavery. That's all.
I know,
it
but
is.
that doesn't mean that the teacher wouldn't adopt an assignment that would be
Wait, now you're
adjacent to what the
moving.
curriculum
The
is,
books are just about slavery.
But you're thinking that they're just teaching the book. You're not thinking.
Do you have any
that they're
evidence
adding
that the
an
teachers are actually
extracurricular-
As a libertarian, the way you fix this is by banning critical race theory, or do you agree that that's
not what I'm saying.
awful?
I would
Okay,
say
you
stopping.
disagree
I'm
with
a
that.
full proponent of the free exchange of ideas, goods, and services. That includes the idea section. So I'm not for banning something entirely. As much as I may not agree with it, as much as I may not like to hear words that are said, as much as I may cringe, I don't believe in stopping that, because I believe the best ideas, not the most popular, I think the best ideas rise to the top.
Okay, do you have any
And
actual
so that's
evidence that the
what I'm
teachers
thinking.
were doing
Okay,
what you're
then after this,
accusing
we gotta
them
go
of
back to
doing?
the list. Okay.
Like, do you have any actual evidence that they were doing what you're accusing them of? Because right now, I'm looking into this case.
There is an African American mother who talks to, I believe it is Tennessee. I might be wrong. There are so many school boards I've covered.
This isn't.
But
I
she
don't
goes
want a
up there
mom
and she gives
complaining
me. I
about
could
this.
play
I
the
want like
testimony
actual
for us if we
assignments
want.
or evidence of this.
So you have no. So just to be clear, you have no evidence that the teacher was trying to make kids feel guilty for being white, other than one parent said that's what they were doing.
I am talking about the conservative response to the curriculum.
The conservative
as it
response
is.
to not the curriculum, to one complaint from one parent. Is that right? Is there any other evidence
There are multiple.
of that
Yeah, there
particular?
are-
In this
you can
case,
go
in that
through
case,
them.
in
It is
Tennessee.
numerous.
What are they?
I would
We'll
like to
go
submit-
through them.
In Tennessee,
I would like
in
to
Tennessee.
submit
I would
that I am
take
white
up
and I
the
do
rest
not
of your
feel bad
day.
about it.
I mean, I've recorded every
Well,
episode
that first
I've
one
ever
fell
done,
to
so
pieces
I
pretty
can,
fucking
I can.
quickly.
But
well, I
this
can
is the
get you some-
primary
I can
example that
get
you're
you many
giving. It doesn't
references.
prove like if this is the primary example. It doesn't. This is your primary example. It doesn't prove
That
what you're
was
trying
one
to say.
that we were talking about an example of woke culture. CRT is
This is just teaching racism
one straw
in
of hay in the hay
schools.
house.
This is just teaching
Okay, so
racism
that
in
was-
schools, and one parent complained about it.
It seems like no matter what I do, you're always going to go, well, what else? What else do you have?
I'm asking you
What
about
else
your
do you have?"
evidence.
It seems like that's
Yeah,
how we
it's like-
started.
Right, you
Okay,
give us
okay,
one
okay,
example.
okay.
It was shit. Give us another one.
Well, that's your subjective take. I
Okay,
would
well,
argue
like
that
you guys-
conservatives
okay,
like
stop.
I read it.
Stop.
I'm reading. I'm looking at it right now.
I said stop. Okay.
Parents who send their children to public or even private schools nowadays are taking a major risk on losing their children to blind brainwashing. And they're going to end up turning on the parents, hating them, and hating everybody, because this woke stuff and this CRT, and even not CRT, they've been pushing this blind brainwashing about imaginary racism for decades, and generation after generation it's gotten worse. You have like young college educated teachers brainwashing their kids into supporting Black Lives Matter, defund the police. You see these posters, all kinds of like communist posters in the classrooms, the radical LGBT agenda pushed on little kids. And they're just so misguided. They're on TikTok coming out to their kids. It's wrong. America was not founded on this slavery and genocide stuff. Slavery wasn't one of the world's worst evils. We have Democrats today who are much worse than the Democrat slave owners of back then. They're killing babies in the womb. It's like out of control. We're going along with these delusions of these people is not showing that is being an a-hole.
Listen, that was a lot, but can you tell me when America stopped being racist specifically?
Racism never existed in the first place.
Hold on. What about racism?
Hold on. Can we pull that? Can we pull that apart real quick? Okay.
Slavery was racist.
America.
Wait, one second.
never
Wait.
racist.
Pause. Let's pause the show. Okay. Can you, just for the panel, can people raise their hand if they believe racism has ever existed in America?
Against whites and everyone else.
Now,
Okay,
through
so I just
anecdote,
wanted
I
to
would say
just
systematic
a general
evidence.
poll. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Can you-
continue, Connor.
Can you explain? Yeah. Can you please explain that to me about like how America was never racist?
America was founded by the Anglos who came here, escaping the corrupt church and the corrupt king, and then they declared independence because the king was exploiting them in many different ways, and it was for them and their posterity. And there were slaves here. The slaves were not bought just because they were black. They were bought because they were for sale. That's not
So
right.
just out of curiosity, so it's for them and their posterity. I've heard this in other groups before, and I'm not saying that you're saying it this way. But like I'm Irish. Like I'm 100% Irish. Now that I've been here and my people have been here for like a century and a half, is America also for my posterity, or am I still just serving like the Anglo hierarchy, and really I'm just here as a, you know, as Nick Fuentes would say, a cappuccino debt slave, to just be like an economic vehicle for fucking like Anglo supremacy? Like,
if you
what's
have
my role?
The spirit of the freedom of speech, and you have the spirit of America, of the Second Amendment and loving the country, then you are at heart American. It's about what's right. And
I mean, that's better
if
than some
you'll notice, like by and large, the white males who are so hated, I suspect that it's partly that they're hated because they vote Republican. They vote for Trump. They vote for people who love the country and they want to bring everybody together. They love everybody. They don't hate everybody. They're Christians, but they're standing in the way of this communism that is this idea of imaginary racism. They're using black people.
Can I just ask another question? Because I just want to be sure, because like I asked this fucking question whenever like a leftist used fascist, so I want to ask you this question since you use communist. Like,
Yeah.
what is your definition of communism?
Liars.
Okay.
Yeah, people who play like they're nice. They play reasonable, much like Vosh does. He plays like he's reasonable and he loves everybody, but really he's not for America. He doesn't want the Second Amendment. He doesn't want the freedom of
that
speech.
shit. Are you kidding me? Even I know that.
Not for Kyle. And so useful idiots who are being used for destruction, they may not think that they're Marxists, but generation after generation, most of this panel has been brainwashed in some form or other to just subvert the country away from what's right. There's no such thing as...
How does that work? Do they lie because they're communists, or did they become communists because they lied?
Ooh, chicken and the egg argument.
Damn.
I'll give you the rest of your life to try and figure out what that meant.
They lie because they're evil. They have anger and evil in their hearts. And when you have anger and evil in your heart, you try to be good, but it's a false imitation of it. And that's what this woke thing is. That's what the CRT thing is. That's what you see all these lady teachers who think that it's a good thing to come out to their kids. They think that some of them actually think that that's the right thing to do. It's a misguided thing. It's a false.
You didn't answer my question.
Well, and just out of curiosity, you were kind of saying that like it's a false god,
one
right?
second. Before, Loner said he didn't answer his question. I saw Hake try to say something. Did you want to answer the question, or did you want to clarify something?
What was the question? It seemed like a dumb question. It seemed like
I can restate it if you want.
How do you know if it's a dumb question if you can't remember what it was?
He says, are communists evil because they lie, or do they lie because they're communists?
Didn't you say give him his whole life to figure it out?
Basically, he's saying, are they liars, therefore they are communists, like people who are liars are communists, or are communists inherently liars? Like which one?
I see. Yeah, communists are inherently liars because not all liars are communists, but all communists are liars.
Ooh.
Okay, but do you have a political? Do you have a political definition for communism?
You were just playing around.
Can I ask one?
A judgment about race, right?
I'm sorry, I have to ask one question. I've been trying to get in. I just have to ask one question. Hey,
okay.
What is your definition of racism? What to you is racism? Does it exist?
No, it does not exist.
What is it then?
It is a judgment. Everybody judges.
You just said my granddad was making a judgment.
Yeah, he was making
race.
Yeah, that's the mechanism of racism, is judging.
The root issue is not this imaginary racism boogeyman. It is a judgment. The people crying racism are guilty of the same judgment that they think the people that they're accusing of racism are guilty of.
But what is it?
Based on their race.
What's that?
What if you judge someone based on their race?
But that's at root.
That's not racism, is it?
No, because it's not the issue. The root issue is a judgment. If you're guilty, if you can't be, people who accuse others of racism think that they're not guilty of racism, but they're guilty of judgment, which is the very crime that they're accusing the other person of.
But what is racism?
You're not answering my question, but it's fine.
Is it even possible to do it?
No, it's a false vice.
No, it's a false vice. It's a false vice.
Yeah.
Well, that's settled. We'll move on to the next topic after some outros, okay? Throwing it over to Riley.
Yeah, so the problem that we talked about originally ended up kind of coming through. So like the problem is that like The term woke is really vague in terms of how it's used. We asked for a specific example. We eventually got to CRT. We asked for examples about how CRT was like negatively affecting people or what exactly they were talking about. Someone gave an example. We looked at that example. All that the example was talking about the existence of racism and the fact that one parent complained about it. And I would say that teaching about racism in our schools is a good thing because clearly there are some people, even on this panel, who say it just does not exist. No one can do a racism, or even if you can, it's bad, or yeah. I don't know. I'm ready for the next topic.
So now we will go into the last topic, which is the death penalty. Do you or do you not support the death penalty? Corporal punishment, however you want to put it. Anyway. We're going to start in the top. Actually, no. We're going to start with Riley. Riley hasn't started us off before, so I'm going to do Riley.
Oh my God, thank you. All right, then. I think that my argument's going to be like relatively simple. I think that we have to be very careful when we're talking about something like capital punishment or something like the death penalty, because that is one type of punishment that is unique to our criminal justice system, is that you cannot undo it if you find out later that you made a mistake. With that being said, since we do not have a criminal justice system which is able to perfectly determine who has or who has not committed a crime, we have appeal systems for a reason, then it probably would make the most sense to not allow that to be something that can be done at all, since we cannot undo it in the event of a mistake. We observe that this happens a lot. We often have mistakes where it turns out that, oh, we sentenced someone to death, and later it turns out that they didn't actually commit a crime. We probably want to prevent that from happening as much as possible. Yeah.
Okay, now it is open dialogue. Looks like Riley wants to start us off, so okay, Riley.
All right, so I'm gonna ask a question. Now, Connor, you might be able to answer this question. I just wanna see what Hake says, because I'm super curious about what he's gonna say. So can I ask him this question and then like have you refrain for a second just to see what he says? So you said that you want the death penalty, but you wanna make sure that we have it in cases where we can be absolutely sure that someone has committed a crime. That's what you said, right? How do we do that?
How do we make sure that the person is absolutely the person who committed the crime?
No, Connor, I was asking Hake. I want Hake to answer that question, because I think you might have, but like I wanna hear what Hake, because Hake seemed very confident that you can be able to absolutely determine when someone has committed a crime. So I want to see what he had in his mind when he was saying that.
I was nodding my head in total agreement when he said beyond a shadow of a doubt. I haven't thought through like how you the ins and outs of how you determine that there's absolutely no doubt. But when I think of examples, he mentioned some of the examples, Dzhokhar Tsarnaev and that guy who shot up the Batman theater shooting. That guy is still alive today. He should be gone long ago.
Okay, but like, what rules do you...
That's an example of... I just told you I don't know. I haven't thought that through, but I don't know what you want from me. But those are two cases where it's quite clear.
Well, I mean, like, because my issue with having the death penalty is that when we cannot be absolutely sure that someone has committed a crime, then it seems incredibly risky, since we cannot take this back as a punishment, to issue it. Even in cases where we're like really, really sure, we have a lot of examples also where we were really, really sure, and then it turned out that we were wrong after. So I want to make sure that we don't have those cases where even when we're really, really sure, but still wrong, that we kill people. So I just want to know like what you would do to make sure that we do not kill innocent people, even when we're like pretty sure that they committed a crime, but we're actually wrong.
I have another question as well to add to that. Like, Hake, you said that you wanted justice to be both swift and beyond a shadow of a doubt. Well, the problem is if it's swift, then it's harder. It's much less likely to be beyond a shadow of a doubt. You mentioned Dylan Roof, actually. One of Dylan Roof's things was that he was appealing for a while because he tried to say he had schizophrenia when he did it. So that would have taken time. So I just wonder how justice can be both swift and without a shadow of a doubt. Maybe you haven't thought that through?
We put logical men in charge, and we don't allow silly defenses like what you just mentioned. Insanity to defense. Insanity is not a defense.
Wait,
you put men of logic back in charge.
Wait, you're a man of logic, right? Can you tell me what you would do?
What do you mean? What would I do?
You said we need to put men in logic in charge so that we know how to avoid these kind of circumstances. You're a man of logic, so tell us what we should do.
Well, I will say a lot of these circumstances, there's a lot of claims that people have been innocent and they actually aren't. So we don't go along with people who are illogical, emotional, intellectual, because the law field has been filled with people who aren't about actual justice or truth. They're about sleazy, snaky, skirting the law and technicalities and stuff.
Wait,
yeah, but she asked you what would a man of logic do, and you just said we should not be illogical.
Right.
Is that all you're offering? That we should just we get swift and we get swift justice beyond a shadow of a doubt. You're the logical one. You tell us what's the difference? Like, how do you make it more logical?
You don't allow these appeals processes, because these appeals processes aren't about a doubt on the case. Sometimes the case is quite clear, no matter how long or short you take with it. The case is clear.
Wait, do you know what appeals are for?
You're just trying to undercut plain truth.
Well, yeah, appeals are about making sure that you don't make a mistake at the trial level. That's what they're for. They're to make sure we don't make a mistake. So why are they bad?
Have you seen some of the ridiculous, endless appeals? Appeal of insanity and all that stuff?
You can only appeal like twice or 3 times. You can appeal to the circuit court level and then to the state Supreme Court and maybe the Supreme Court. There's a finite number of times you can do it.
People are on death row for years and years.
To make sure they didn't commit a crime.
It's not to make sure that that we don't make a mistake. It's to feel sorry for them. Your loaner box just gave an example of Dylan Roof saying, "Oh, I was insane."
Well, it's just because you brought up Dylan Roof, but people have been exonerated.
Can we do that, Mr.
Yeah,
Roof?
okay,
From
but
now, thank you.
People have been exonerated after years of being on death row, though. That's why it's there. It's because sometimes it takes years for the proper evidence to surface and for that to be switched over. So how would you avoid that happening if you wanted justice to be swift? How would you know every time if you're...
When there's no doubt.
When there's no doubt.
How do you make sure there's no doubt if you've gotten rid of the appeals?
I think we can probably move on from this.
Can I make a side statement really quick?
Undercut stuff when people know when somebody is guilty.
Well, I was going to say, like, so basically what we're talking about is we're talking about a time and a technology shift within the past 50 years. Investigative and conviction measures have not been stagnant for the past 40 or 50 years. And realistically, what we've been able to achieve technologically is amazing. As far as evidentiary standard, I think that like what you said is true, but chances are, because what it's true is we had those beyond a reasonable doubt cases where it wasn't beyond a reasonable doubt, and they used DNA evidence for specific things related to the case that were alleged to have occurred with the perpetrator, and then they used DNA in order to exonerate that person. So that person was the rapist, or they were the murderer, and they had the murder weapon, and they did the murder, but when they actually did the DNA swab of the murder weapon or the rape kit or anything like that, whatever DNA evidence they had, it ended up exonerating the person who was convicted of that crime. But this is not something that hasn't improved with time, and this is kind of like my frustration. I know I'm in a room with like super smart fucking people, but like my frustration is like there are these cases that like do exist. Dylan Roof is not contesting whether or not he committed the crime. He did the crime. He murdered like a dozen people in cold blood. And if he was captured by some like terroristic ideology and he's of sound mind, I think he should have the death penalty. Doshkar Tsarnaev, same thing. I'm trying to think of other examples, but there's also like, I don't want to get too graphic because this is Twitch, but at the same time, like there are some serial killing and torture cases that would like make you lose your mind with how graphic they can be. And there's just some of those people that I would reserve this right for. I have set a super high bar, and I don't care that I'm on the losing side, by the way. 30 years from now, if I'm just a fucking old fogey with like outmoded ideas about criminal justice and you guys fucking win the goddamn culture war, fuck it. I don't give a shit. We won't put people to death anymore. But what I would say is that if we're going to maintain this institution, it should serve a purpose. And the criticisms that you bring up of the death penalty as it exists now are very real. We should not put somebody to death unless we 100% know it's them based off of multitudes of evidence. And we should only do it for the most of extreme crimes. And that's what I've narrowed my argument to. I don't defend the system as it exists right now.
Yeah. You could do that. I mean, you could do that relatively easily. You could simply pass a statute that says the death penalty is only applied if you have video evidence. You must have at least 5 eyewitnesses. He must have a confession. You must have all those things. Like, you can easily just pass the statute. You could even do something that says you have to have 2 different jury trials and both juries have to be completely unanimous. I mean, you could go on and on with different like ways to do it.
I think. Well, hold on. I think I understand what you're saying, Connor. The problem is that, like, as we're seeing more and more so nowadays, the evidence that we think is ironclad can also still have problems, right? Like for example, like deepfake videos are becoming better and better by the day, and there's a risk that, like, oh well, we all treat like this kind of evidence as like ironclad. Well, I mean, like, there's increasingly getting to be a higher chance, however large or small that chance is, there is a higher chance that even that could be fabricated, right? And there are like better like pieces of evidence you can appeal to, but I am concerned about the idea of thinking that, like, oh, there's some evidence that we know to be ironclad, because that was the same logic that we had back when we first discovered forensic evidence. And then we discovered later on a bunch of issues where we accidentally did sentence a bunch of people to death off of the evidence that we thought was super ironclad at the time, but then it came out later that there were issues, right? Like, I want to make sure that we're not like repeating those same historical issues. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but wouldn't you agree with me that, like, forensics and technology and like even data forensics and all that kind of stuff is like, it's a different world than 1985, right? Like, I mean, I hope we could at least land there. Well, and then of course it wouldn't be based off of like a solo factor. So if you had a video and that's all you had, and it was like a security cam that was given to you by a party who had a motive, you wouldn't use that as the only data point in order to secure a death penalty investigation. You would absolutely basically use like corroborative eyewitnesses and DNA and like all that kind of shit. And like, and by the way, the default goes to the in my hypothetical scenario, the default goes to the defendant. Like you said, you can't put somebody to death that you don't have 100% certainty that they're the ones who committed the crime, because then you don't have the chance to exonerate them in the future. So, you know, that's where if you were like, oh well, we had one video, turns out it was digitally manipulated. Well, guess what? That motherfucker doesn't get put down. You know.
I mean, like, I understand the intuition, but even like, I don't know, like, there's some pieces of evidence that you're talking about, like, for example, like eyewitness testimony. So this is something, all right, we're talking about like things that law students are taught in like their first year of law school. One of the first things that we're taught in evidence is that eyewitness testimony is sometimes like the worst evidence you can rely on, right? Because people, like, as like an example, we don't have to like go through this, but like, you know, the example that like law professors will commonly use is on the first day to ask people to recall exactly what they had for lunch exactly 1 week ago from today. If you ask most people, they can probably at best like guesstimate based on their typical behaviors, and they're going to struggle to come up with very precise kinds of information. But this is what we ask people to do in the legal field all the time. Now, that's not usually the only type of evidence that we use in these kinds of cases, but like, I just caution that we're appealing to this idea that like, oh yeah, there's this evidence that's like super ironclad and we know it's going to be the best, but we can't really say that until we know later on down the line when we discover problems, right? Like, there are probably issues with the evidence we're currently relying on that we can't anticipate until later on when they're discovered, you know? Like, if we knew them now, we wouldn't use it.
Sure, and like, obviously the system always gets fucking dialed in, right? Like, you know, we always figure this shit out. So if we were talking about, and here's the thing, it's like, I know you're not being intentionally obtuse. It's other people in previous conversations who have been frustrating. To act like there aren't like examples of this is frustrating to me, because there are criminal examples of folks who have confessed to the crimes. We know that they did it. They're of sound mind. We have DNA evidence. We have digital forensics. We have eyewitness testimony. We have all of these things. So while it might be rare, that's actually kind of my point. I only want it to be applied in rare circumstance. I want it to be applied in these niche whatevers. And like, again, like, I don't have like a massive stake if it doesn't seem like I'm getting fucking triggered, just because if y'all win, like, fuck it, we just don't put people to death anymore. But I will be a little bit fucking pissy. This is actually one of the things that like kind of does make me want to hold on to this. It might be an emotional argument, but there was the Oslo bomber, the guy in Norway, Breivik or whatever. He killed like 100 fucking people, including teenagers. He basically walked around slaughtering them like cattle. He set off a bomb downtown as a distraction, rounded up what was the Democrats of fucking Norway and their fucking teenage kids, and walked around executing all of them. I think he killed like 110 people. He had the gall after committing this heinous crime, because Norway does not have the death penalty, to say that it was poor conditions in the prison because all he had access to as far as video games is fucking PlayStation 2 console. Now, I don't know whether or not they gave him a fucking PS5, but I can guarantee you that if I was the fucking warden of that prison and Anders Breivik, the dude who indisputably murdered 110 people, including fucking teenagers, came to me bitching about his fucking video game system, I would have no problems taking him on a fucking camping trip to the fucking Everglades, right? So that's what I'm fucking saying is there are absolutely cases that need like that where this would be practically applied from a legalistic standpoint.
I have a question about that.
To be clear, a better punishment would have just been giving him an Xbox. Okay, Loner, you go on.
Damn.
Can I follow up on something that Connor said earlier? Just to go back.
Sure, and then we need to look at wrapping up.
Okay, I just want to follow up and not like and I guess this also goes to like what Brant was talking about too, with like the really extreme examples, right? And I understand that, and I understand that there are going to be some instances where it's going to be it's going to seem very clear that someone has done something egregious and that there's enough evidence to be able to issue something like the death penalty. The issue is that right now we're talking about designing rules for an entire system of criminal implementation, right? And ultimately, the people who are going to be making decisions about what does constitute an egregious, clear act and not one are going to be human beings, right? So I feel like when you bring in that element, that to me, regardless of sometimes we're going to have the egregious examples that you are talking about, but when we leave it up to humans who are going to be susceptible to some degree of error to be able to make the differentiation between what is a clear example and what isn't, there's going to be some degree of error there, and we probably ought prevent that from happening.
Whatever.
No,
whatever.
It's not whatever.
All right. Well,
it's nuanced. I like it.
But Riley.
Oh, chill.
Riley's muted. No.
Oh wait, can y'all hear me?
Now I can hear.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna reiterate my argument from the beginning that the problem that we have is that in our criminal justice system, we, even when we're using the best degree of evidence, can still often have room for error in determining the outcome of certain cases. That's why we have our appeal systems. I understand the arguments that Connor was making earlier, and I want to be respectful of them because I think that he brings up a good point that sometimes there's really egregious examples and it feels like we ought be able to at least punish those people. And the problem I have with that respectfully is that even if we have those kind of cases, we want to be careful because we're talking about designing rules for an entire system of deciding cases. And if we leave room for error in terms of letting people decide other cases, then we end up leaving it up to the average person to still decide what is a clear-cut case and what isn't. And that's kind of where, and since there's room for error and we can't take it back, then I would still caution against allowing death penalty to persist. Yeah, I don't know. I've had fun. I've enjoyed talking with all of you. This has been fun as fuck. So my name is Riley Grace Rochong. I am the #1 Elder Scrolls Online streamer, and if you want to help me on that quest, then you can stop by and hang out. And we also talk politics and stuff sometimes.
I just wanted to correct the record on Proud Boys. They're generally honorable, in fact, by and large, honorable men who just defend the innocent from the evil. I believe that this whole thing is about getting rid of conservative Christian males, especially if they're Trump supporters. We have a country that's brainwashed into thinking that this BLM thing is a good thing, that the civil rights movement was valid, that blacks in America don't have rights. Give me a break. They're, if anything, we treat them too well. We treat them in a way that's unjustly. There's no such thing as white supremacy. That's a fake boogeyman made up by people who feel sorry for criminals and clamp down. It's like a mama spirit. You bully the person who's trying to be enforcing the law, who's innocent, and you feel sorry for the criminal. I just want to clarify, liberals, communists do not have real love. It just doesn't go together. Satan has a version of love and understanding that is a false imitation. He comes as the angel of light, and I think that's what woke is. We're going going backwards though. We're becoming more like South Africa, where it was supposed to be this rainbow nation and we thought apartheid was so bad, but we've turned it and made things worse. And that's what happens when you let liberals run wild in the country and let that mama mindset of feeling sorry for the minorities or whatever, when things are honestly more than fair, beyond fair. This marketplace of ideas stuff is a bad idea because you guys are trying to get along with evil, and you give it an inch, it's going to take a mile. Evil will never stop. You'll find yourself accepting all kinds of insanity. There's no such thing as racial justice. White people right now, men right now, are afraid to tell the truth, to have their freedom of speech, and everybody else, all the other so-called oppressed minorities, are encouraged in their anger, which is the worst thing for them. This false sympathy for Black Americans and the LGBT people is the worst thing for them. It shows love to oppose the false ideas that they are victims. A man of logic will wait and see. You saw a whole lot of emotional people forming a lynchmob.
Can I ask a question? A clarifying question quick?
I mean, against Kyle Rittenhouse.
Quick clarifying question. You said a man of logic. Does it have to be a man?
Yes.
Okay.
It should be a man.
Does sexism exist?
No.
Yeah, I figured. Okay.
Logical men don't write studies. Liberals write studies. We're not even putting them in jail or slavery or forced volunteer work for 1,000 hours per $10 that they steal or something. We could be making it reasonable, but they have to die. We have to be dispassionate about these things.